I should have turned back when I saw the gates. The iron bars, twisted and corroded with rust, loomed in the dim gray of early evening like ribs torn from the earth. They weren't locked. That was the first warning. Places like this, relics of madness and neglect, were supposed to be sealed tight. Chained. Watched. But the gates to Merrow Hill Asylum stood slightly ajar, yawning like a hungry mouth. I stepped through them anyway. My boots crunched gravel as I crossed the threshold, the wind whispering through skeletal trees flanking the overgrown driveway. A storm threatened overhead. Heavy clouds, a sickly yellow-gray, hung low in the sky, pressing down with the weight of rain. I could smell it, thick and electric in the air. But that wasn't all I smelled. There was something else. Something sour and metallic. Like rot. I told myself it was just the old pipes. Rust. Maybe a dead animal. I was good at lying to myself. I'd come alone. The kind of stupid, obsessive alone that comes after too many nights without sleep, too many voices on the tape recorder that weren't mine. I was a documentary podcaster, Obscura Realms, you might have heard of it, and Merrow Hill had become my white whale. Every time I researched it, something went wrong. Files disappeared. Interviewees went silent. My partner left the show after one trip to the archives, said he had nightmares for weeks and couldn't go back. I couldn't stop. Not after what I'd heard on the tape. There was no voice on the original file, just static. But after cleaning up the audio, there was something behind the hiss, a whisper. My name. Just once. Soft, like breath behind my ear. I hadn't told anyone that part. The front doors of the asylum hung open. One broken from its hinges, the other sagging like it had grown tired of holding secrets. Inside, the air was thick. Not just stale, heavy. Saturated. It was colder, too, several degrees below the outside, and it smelled wrong. Mold, copper, and something like antiseptic, sharp and stale, like a wound that refused to heal. My flashlight sliced through the gloom, revealing a reception area frozen in time. Desks overturned. A gurney on its side. Patient files littering the floor like dead leaves. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by my breath. There were no windows in this hall, not anymore. They'd been covered. Not boarded. Bricked. Sloppy, haphazard masonry smeared with what looked like old blood beneath the grime. I knelt to pick up a patient chart. The paper crumbled at the edges, water damaged and torn, but I could still make out the name. Elena Voss. Admitted 1968. Diagnosis, catatonia. Treatment, isolation and electrotherapy. A photo was clipped to the top corner. A woman in her 20s, thin and pale, staring straight at the camera. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, teeth red, as if she'd bitten her own tongue clean through. My hand was shaking. I dropped the file and moved on. I followed the old hallway past broken wheelchairs and streaks of brown-black smeared across the tile. Sometimes, the stains looked like handprints. Sometimes, drag marks. The further I walked, the more I swore I could hear something, not a voice exactly, but a pulse. A deep thudding rhythm, like footsteps behind the walls. I found the room by accident. A door marked Therapy 3 sat ajar. The light from my flashlight hit something shiny just beyond the threshold. When I stepped inside, the smell hit me like a fist. Rot. Not old rot, fresh. The room had one chair bolted to the floor. Leather straps hung from its arms like snakes. A metal box on the wall housed electrodes, and thick black cables coiled across the floor. Blood, thick, wet blood, pooled beneath the chair, still glistening. It looked recent. Impossible. No one had been here for decades. I turned to leave and saw the mirror. It took a second to register that it was a one-way mirror, a viewing room on the other side. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed. But then it blinked. I didn't. I stumbled back, heart thundering. The reflection didn't mimic me. It stayed seated, strapped into the chair, mouth open, eyes bleeding. And then it smiled. The lights in my flashlight flickered, and when they came back, the mirror was just a mirror. No reflection. No chair. No blood. I ran. Not out, not yet, just further in. Some part of me thought, get to the center. Find the heart. Something was wrong in this place, and I couldn't stop. Not after seeing that. The hallway opened into a long corridor lined with patient rooms. Every door had a small slot at eye level, barred with rusted steel. Some were broken open. Others still hung shut. I passed a door with fingernail scratches carved deep into the wood. Another had what looked like words scrawled in feces, or dried blood. One phrase repeated over and over, "Don't listen to her." As if in response, I heard it again. A whisper. My name. Elliot. It was coming from behind a door at the end of the hall. Room 122. Unlike the others, this one was clean. Untouched. No grime. No rot. The brass number gleamed. Against every instinct in my body, I opened it. Inside was a single cot, neatly made. A nightstand. A record player. A journal sat on the bed. When I touched it, the air shifted. The room dimmed. I opened the journal. The first page read, "To whomever finds this, she is awake now. Don't speak to her. Don't look at her eyes. Burn this place. Burn it all." The next page was soaked in blood. That's when I started seeing them. Not ghosts. Not people. Pieces. There was a man in the hallway now, but only his upper half, dragging itself along the ceiling, spine arching like a centipede. His jaw hung loose, unhinged. His tongue writhed, bloated and black, slapping against his chest as he moved. He smiled when he saw me. And then came the woman. Crawling backwards down the wall, her eyes stitched shut, blood crusted around her lids. She was whispering something over and over, a psalm with no melody. "Tell her. Tell her. Tell her." I backed into the room, slammed the door, and locked it. My breath came fast, shallow. The journal in my hand twitched like it was alive. A new entry had appeared on the next page. "You've seen them now. You're marked. She will follow you into your dreams. And then into your body." I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I huddled on the floor of room 122 with the journal clutched to my chest like a shield, waiting for the sun to rise, but it never did. There were no windows in the patient rooms. Only vents, long, horizontal slits cut into the concrete above each door. And that's where I started hearing the voices. Not whispers this time. Conversations. Dozens of them, layered on top of one another, all coming through the vent. Like the building itself was talking to itself. One voice kept rising above the rest. A child's voice. Soft, girlish. She was singing. "Skin like silk and eyes like glass, tell the nurse, she'll let you pass. But don't you cry and don't you scream, or she will crawl into your dreams." I stood and stepped closer to the vent. The metal grill was ice cold, and as I leaned in, I felt breath on the other side. Then, words. Right against my ear. "Elliot. Open the door." I backed away so fast I tripped, smacked my elbow on the edge of the cot. Pain flared, sharp and electric. When I looked again, something was staring through the vent. A single eye. Human. But wrong. The pupil was vertical. Slitted like a cat's. And it was smiling. I left room 122. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The air had started to change, thicken. The walls pulsed. Breathing. The journal in my arms burned with static warmth. I shoved it into my backpack and moved fast. I tried to retrace my steps, but the hallways were different now. The lights were on in places, flickering, cold white fluorescence humming overhead. Some of the doors that had been locked were now wide open. Inside, I saw horrors I can't forget. A woman with her face peeled open and pinned back like butterfly wings. A man stitched to the wall, his arms flayed and nailed into the brick, still twitching. Another was dragging his own intestines behind him like a leash. And they saw me. Every single one turned to look, even those without eyes. But they didn't follow. Instead, I felt drawn. Pulled. Like the asylum was rearranging itself, guiding me somewhere deeper. I should have fought it. But my legs moved on their own. I found the stairs behind a heavy steel door labeled, "Staff Only." The knob was slick with something black, but it turned easily. The stairwell was pitch dark. My flashlight flickered and died the second I stepped inside. All I could do was feel my way down. The air grew colder with each step, until it burned in my lungs. I could hear something breathing down there, not one thing, but many. When my foot hit the last step, the lights came on. And I saw the basement. It wasn't what I expected. Not torture chambers or old storage rooms. Not at first. It was pristine. Lit by harsh white fluorescence that buzzed like flies. Rows of file cabinets stretched from wall to wall. A maze of metal and dust. The floor was spotless. Not a speck of dirt. It smelled like bleach and burnt hair. I crept between the rows, scanning the names on each drawer. Most were labeled by year, 1954, admits L, and so on. And then I saw it. A drawer labeled simply, Elliot Knox. My name. I reached out, heart pounding, and pulled it open. Inside was a file. A thick one. Stamped with the hospital's seal and marked ongoing evaluation. I opened it. Inside were pages of notes. Handwritten by various doctors. Diagrams. Test results. EEG readings. And photos. Me, strapped to a gurney. Screaming. My eyes bloodshot, mouth foaming. Another image, me, sedated, hooked to IVs. One more. My skull, open during surgery, with something black and root-like wrapped around my frontal lobe. The notes read, subject believes he is an outsider. Symptoms of severe dissociative identity disorder, compounded by hallucinatory psychosis. Continued exposure to her is worsening the split. Recommend full excision of parasitic delusion. I staggered back, dropping the file. None of it made sense. This wasn't real. I'd never been here. I was an investigator. I had never. Then I heard it again. My voice. From somewhere deeper in the basement. Begging. Screaming. Please. Let me out. I remember now. I remember. I ran. Blind through corridors that shouldn't have existed. Past surgical rooms filled with twitching mannequins that screamed without mouths. Past walls that bled and laughed. Past cages where men wore the skin of animals and danced in silence. I found a hallway lined with rusted doors, no labels, no handles, just holes in the middle. I heard moaning behind one. I heard myself crying behind another. One door stood open. Inside was a room wrapped in flesh. The walls pulsed with veins. The floor was soft and slick beneath my boots. In the center sat a chair, and in that chair, me. Or something that looked like me. Its face was blurred. constantly shifting. It wore my clothes. My voice came from its mouth, distorted and hollow. It looked up and smiled. "You're almost ready," it said. "She's waking up inside you." I tried to run, but the door had sealed behind me. The thing in the chair stood. And then everything went black. I woke strapped to a bed. Arms tight. Legs immobile. The smell of antiseptic and meat in my nose. Bright lights above me, flickering. Machines beeping. There was someone standing beside the bed. She wore a nurse's uniform. White. Stained red from the elbows down. Her face was featureless, no eyes, no mouth, just smooth skin stretched over bone. She leaned in close and whispered without a mouth, "You've been very sick, Elliot. But don't worry. We're going to fix you." She raised a syringe. Thick black fluid sloshed inside. It smelled like decay and burned plastic. I screamed, or tried to, but no sound came out. She plunged it into my neck. And I felt her enter. Something ancient. Something cold. Sliding behind my eyes. Threading through my thoughts like barbed wire. I saw a field of red flowers screaming as they burned. I saw children sewn together. I saw Elena Vos hanging upside down, still alive, whispering secrets through torn lips. And then I saw myself. Outside the asylum. Climbing the steps. Again. 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 I woke in the car. Same as before. Hands on the wheel. The asylum up ahead. Just past dusk. Same gray sky. Same wind. It felt wrong. Too familiar. Like I'd watched this scene 1,000 times. My phone buzzed, voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I hit play on speaker. It was my voice, but the tone was off, strained, half sobbing, half laughing. "She's inside me. I think she's using my memories. If you're hearing this, you're already back. You're already in the loop. God help you. God help us all." Then static. Then screaming. A woman's, high and wet, like her throat had been flayed open. Then silence. I stared up at the asylum gates. The same as last time. Open. Something inside me screamed to drive away. But my body didn't listen. I stepped out of the car. Gravel crunched beneath my boots. The gate creaked shut behind me on its own. No wind. No storm. Just the sound of something breathing in the trees. This time, I didn't go through the front door. I circled the building, flashlight in hand, and found a side entrance, a staff door near what looked like an old garden, now just tangled thorns and broken statues. The door was open. Of course it was. The hallway on the other side was different. Narrower. Claustrophobic. The walls here were covered in photographs, hundreds of them. Old black and white images in dusty frames, but all of the same woman, Elena Vos. In every picture, she was posed in a different ward. The intake desk. The shock therapy room. Even rooms I hadn't seen yet, a surgical theater, a chapel, a nursery. But it wasn't just her. Behind her, in every photo, someone else was staring at the camera. A doctor. A nurse. A patient. And in every image, they were all slightly wrong. Staring dead-eyed. Blood around their noses or mouths. One was holding a scalpel against their own throat and smiling. The last photo in the line was dated 2025. Today's date. And in it, was me. Standing in room 122, holding the journal, mouth stretched wide in a scream so large it had torn my cheeks open. Blood ran down my neck in black rivulets. Behind me stood the nurse. Her hand on my shoulder. smiling without a face. I ran again. This time into the east wing. A part one hadn't explored. The air was thicker here. Stifling. The kind of pressure that squeezes your ribs and makes your ears pop. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper patterned with tiny hands. Not prints, drawings. Crude little fingers and arms, over and over, like the work of a disturbed child. And then I found the nursery. There were no children. Not anymore. Just cribs. Dozens of them. Some overturned, others splintered. Each one had a blood-stained name tag, Patient Zero. 1962, 1963. 1964. I heard something wet moving in the dark. Flashlight on. It skittered past the cribs, just at the edge of light, low to the ground, malformed limbs bending the wrong way. I caught a glimpse of its face, infantile, but ancient, teeth like broken glass and two extra eyes stitched onto its forehead. It whispered in a voice like a leaking pipe, "Mama's watching. Mama's inside." Then it vanished. I moved through the nursery, checking every crib. In one, I found a bundle of cloth, swaddled tight. I should have left it alone. But I pulled it open. Inside was a face, my face, but twisted. Its mouth opened and 1,000 wasps poured out, buzzing from a throat that gurgled my name. I screamed and fell back. And the cribs began to shake. I bolted into the next corridor, heart battering my ribs. Blood was running down the walls now. Slowly, like the walls themselves were sweating it. The floor squelched beneath my boots. The lights buzzed overhead and then went dead. Red emergency lights clicked on with a sound like a bone snapping. Everything went red. The next door was marked, "Seclusion, authorized personnel only." I pushed it open and found a round room. Entirely white, no windows, padded walls stitched shut with black thread. In the center sat a man in a straitjacket. He looked up when I entered, his face pale and smeared with old blood. His eyes were gouged out, two black pits. But he smiled when he heard my footsteps. "She's almost ready," he said. "You're almost hers. You know that, don't you?" I backed away, but he lunged, impossibly fast, and slammed into me. His forehead cracked against mine and for one terrible moment, our minds touched. I saw everything. Screaming wards. Flesh puppets sewn from patients. The real Elliot Knox, strapped to a chair deep beneath the asylum, bleeding from every orifice as something invisible whispered through his teeth. And behind it all, a throne made of spinal cords and 4 tubes, and on it sat Elena Voss. Her eyes were stitched open. Her mouth was stitched shut. And she was smiling. The room dissolved. Now I was somewhere else. I couldn't tell if I was dreaming or hallucinating or dead. The floor was wet beneath me. The ceiling dripped with blood. I stood. The hall ahead was lined with mirrors. In each one, I saw different versions of myself. Some mutilated, others screaming, one being operated on by blind nurses with jagged scissors. The last mirror was clear. I approached it. My reflection blinked. And then it opened its mouth and screamed, "Wake up, wake up, wake," glass shattered. Blood gushed from the frame like a burst artery, coating me in warmth. Behind the mirror was a tunnel. Flesh-lined. Pulsing. It breathed. I crawled through. At the end was a door. Painted red. No handle. No lock. Just one word scratched into it, "Inside." I pressed my palm to it. It opened. The red door led downward. No stairs, no slope, just gravity shifting, tilting my entire body forward as if the world had folded in half. I stumbled, fell through it, and dropped. The fall didn't end. I screamed. Wind tore past me. My skin peeled back and then resealed, over and over. I saw memories flicker in the darkness beside me, my mother's face, the white room, her smile. Then newer ones, the journal, the voice in the vent, the woman without a face. When I landed, it was silent. Utterly, utterly silent. I stood on something soft and hot, like wet lungs. Above me stretched a cathedral of bone and sinew, chandeliers of nerve and gristle dripping viscera. The smell was ripe, fermentation, blood, and sweet, cloying rot. This was the heart of Marrow Hill. I was no longer in the asylum. I was in her. It didn't look like a garden. More like a charnel field. Rows of figures staked to the floor by their own rib bones, heads bowed, mouths sewn shut. Some moaned softly. Others twitched. All of them were missing their eyes. In the center grew a tree. A thing made of vertebrae and tendon. Its branches writhed with hands instead of leaves. At its base, half buried in slick red mulch, sat a familiar shape. The journal. I staggered toward it. My boots sank ankle deep in the mess. The tree groaned above me, a sound like bending steel and childbirth. When I touched the journal, it burned. Pages flipped on their own. Blood bubbled from the ink. I saw new entries, ones I hadn't written. One's written in a shaky, jagged hand, the wound is open now. She wears his skin. She walks with the lost. He is almost ripe. Then another, this one in perfect script, Elliot, you were never investigating. You were always coming home. Love, Elena. A path opened in the muck, drawn by some unseen will. I followed it, moving past the garden of eyeless things and into a tight corridor lined with rib-like arches. The air buzzed with low, guttural vibrations, not sound, but something underneath sound. It hurt to walk. Each step drove needles into my joints. Blood leaked from my ears. My skin began to crack. At the end of the corridor was a room filled with light, not sunlight, but something hotter. Raw light. Exposing. Peeling. In the center was a slab. And on it, me. Split open from chest to groin. Organs pinned aside. My heart beat sluggishly in a cage of wire. And hovering above it, fingers long as scalpels, was Elena Voss. She no longer looked human. Her spine arched out of her back like insect limbs. Her eyes were rows of red slits. Her skin was made of writing, lines and lines of patient reports, etched in scar tissue. Her mouth, though stitched, moved beneath the threads. I heard her voice in my head, you were such a good host. But you've worn thin, Elliot. I think it's time we took another slice. I tried to run. My feet didn't move. Elena's hand reached down and plunged into the reflection of me on the slab. I felt it. Her fingers inside my ribs, curling around my heart. My vision went white. I felt my bones shift. I screamed until my throat tore open. The slab dissolved into mirrors. I stood alone again. But I wasn't me anymore. I was wearing my body like a costume. I felt something writhing beneath the skin, tugging on nerves, chewing on memories. I staggered forward. The hallway reassembled. Steel doors, white tile, overhead lights flickering. I was back in the asylum. But the walls were alive. Mouths opened across them, gasping. Eyes stared and blinked and wept. Nurses crawled along the ceiling, their limbs too long, their spines cracking with every twist. And ahead of me stood a mirror. I looked into it. The thing staring back wasn't me. Not fully. The face was too thin. The skin too pale. The eyes burned red. It smiled. I ran until my lungs gave out. I ran past operating theaters that pulsed with heartbeats. Past waiting rooms filled with mannequins whispering into phones that weren't plugged in. Past rooms labeled Observation, where I watched 100 versions of myself screaming in unison. I found the real Elliot in the deepest ward. Room 0. It didn't exist on any map. The walls were made of flesh, stitched closed with surgical tubing. I tore it open and crawled inside. He sat on the floor, hugging his knees, covered in sores. One eye gone. His mouth sewn shut. But I knew him. It was me. Before the infection. Before her. I dropped to my knees in front of him. He looked up. Begged without words. And behind him, in the corner of the room, was a crib. Inside it was a mouth. Just a mouth. No face. No body. Just lips and teeth and darkness. And it spoke. Trade, and I'll let one of you go. But not whole. Never whole. Not after what she's done. I stared at my own body. At the other me. And I made the only choice I could. The mouth in the crib smacked its lips wetly, grinning without eyes. Choose, Elliot. Your mind or your body. One stays. One goes. The other me whimpered, no sound, just the shaking of a trapped soul. I looked down at my hands. At the raw, red veins threading beneath my skin like worms. My reflection had been changing for hours, piece by piece, slipping away into something else. I touched the wall. It pulsed. Living. Watching. And then I said, "Take me. But let him forget. Let him live without this." The mouth opened wider, unhinging like a snake. Done. It screamed. So did I. The sound cracked the walls. Blood sprayed from the ceiling like a burst artery. My other self jerked backward, eyes rolling white, and began to bleed memories. They leaked from his ears and nose, images, voices, sensations I couldn't grasp. I fell. And when I landed, I was alone in a black hallway with walls made of stitched faces. I wandered. There was no direction anymore. Just an endless corridor of pain. The walls murmured as I passed, Patient 32A, left in the shock room. Patient 19C, split open and stitched shut. Patient 0, Elena, still here. Always here. Every door I opened showed another horror. One room held a carousel of bodies nailed in place, spinning to the sound of laughter. Another had a nurse carving words into her own stomach with a scalpel. Do no harm, do no harm, do no harm, again and again until her intestines spilled out in coils. I passed an old surgical suite where doctors in gas masks were performing lobotomies on mirror reflections. I kept going. I had to. Until I saw her. Elena stood in a long hallway, the lights flickering like a dying heartbeat. She wore a nurse's uniform now, pristine white, soaked through with arterial spray at the waist. Her face was whole again, but wrong. Too symmetrical. Lips too red. Skin too smooth, like porcelain baked in screams. She didn't blink. She pointed at me. And the walls collapsed. I was flung backward into a treatment room, chains dangling from the ceiling, tables soaked with blackened blood. I landed on my back. Before I could move, she was above me. Her fingers slid into my mouth. I gagged. They kept going. Down my throat. Writhing. Feeding. I felt them scrape my spine. And her voice slithered into my head. I lived inside this place for decades. They buried me under pills and shock. They called me treatment resistant. But they couldn't kill what they didn't understand. So I waited. I learned. And now I am Marrow Hill. My bones cracked. My skin split at the seams. She was wearing me from the inside. I don't remember leaving the room. I just remember the sound of alarms and the dripping of blood from my fingers. My hands weren't mine anymore. My thoughts weren't mine. I moved with purpose, but not my own. I walked the halls like I belonged. The patients, the things, bowed their heads as I passed. Some cried. Others tore at their faces. I saw my own body, my original self, curled up in a fetal position inside a padded cell. He didn't remember anything. Just stared at the ceiling and smiled. I leaned close and whispered, "You're free now." But I'm not. Then I turned and walked away, deeper into the asylum. Back to the Red Room. Back to the throne. The heart of Marrow Hill pulsed around me. I entered the core, a cavern of twisted steel, blood vessels, and nerve endings. The walls dripped cerebrospinal fluid. Every inch of it thought. Every surface whispered memories. And in the center sat the throne. A spire of bone and 4 bags and surgical tubing, rising from a pit of black bile. I climbed it. Every step peeled away more of me. I remembered every patient they tortured. Every experiment. Every woman they called mad for screaming too loud. Every child locked in solitary for not smiling on cue. I felt their pain as if it were mine. And when I sat on the throne, I saw the entire asylum from the inside out. Every room. Every eye. I was not Elliot Knox anymore. I was what they made. And they would all remember me. The throne reshaped me. Bone wrapped around my spine like a corset. My skin pulled taut, then sagged in places, becoming a patchwork of everyone who had ever screamed here. I saw them all, patients, orderlies, doctors, ghosts, stitched into my flesh, blinking from beneath the surface. And then the walls began to shift. Not around me. Inside me. I understood now. The asylum was not a place. It was a nervous system. And I had become its new cortex. A hive of suffering, built layer by layer from a century of blood and memory. And I wasn't alone. They rose from the bile at the base of the throne, the architects. 6 of them. One with a bird's skull for a head, wearing a surgical apron stitched from baby blankets. One that floated, its spinal column twitching like an eel. One that crawled on its face. One wrapped in typewriter ribbon and bleeding endless medical files. One that sang. And one that looked like Elena, before the transformation, eyes filled with tears and teeth that never stopped growing. They circled me. The one with the bird's skull leaned forward and whispered, voice rasping through cracked bone, "You are our answer, Elliot. Our scalpel. You will cut the old world free." I didn't walk the halls anymore, I bled through them. The walls opened for me. Doors turned to mouths. Gurneys writhed as I passed. I understood the blueprints now, every twist of corridor, every hidden treatment room, every forgotten file. Marrow Hill had no secrets from me anymore. I arrived at the observation deck. Beneath me stretched the recovery ward, at least, that's what the sign used to say. Now it was a sea of screaming white. Dozens of patients strapped to beds, heads caved in, leaking light from their eyes and ears. Nurses without mouths moved among them, trailing 4 bags filled with crawling shadows. I descended. As I entered the ward, all sound stopped. Time pulsed. The patient sat up in unison, eyes blank, bodies jerking like marionettes. One of them opened its mouth. Not to speak, but to reveal another mouth inside, wider, hungrier, and inside that, my own face, rotting. I ran. But I didn't run far enough. Room 108 had been sealed. They called it the Echo Room. No records. No keys. Just rusted bolts and rust-colored stains. But the door opened for me now. Inside was a sphere of glass the size of a person. Floating inside was something shaped like a fetus with no skin, its nerves exposed and twitching. Tubes fed into it from the ceiling. Red, blue, and yellow. I saw myself in it. My first memory. My last breath. The moment I screamed during my first intake exam. It pulsed, not alive, but remembering life. I touched the glass. And I saw it all. I was no longer Elliot Knox. I was Echo. I was every scream that had ever gone unanswered. I was the breath caught in a lobotomized lung. I was the hand that never stopped cutting. And I remembered the truth. I wasn't investigating Merrill Hill. I had been born here. I was patient zero. Not the beginning of the infection, but its purpose. My records were sealed because I never left. The Elliot Knox who lived outside the walls. He was a shell, a projection. An escape attempt. But the real me never got out. Until now. I opened my mouth and the lights blew out. The air turned to rot. Blood wept from the walls like sweat. And I rose from the floor like a god built from syringes and scalpels. No more forgetting. No more silence. They'll all remember now. The intercoms came alive. They hadn't worked in 50 years. But now, they screamed. All of them, all at once, an orchestra of agony, decades of repressed screams released like dam water bursting through a crack. The asylum convulsed. Doors slammed open. Beds slid across the floor. Old corpses sat up and cried. I walked through the storm, untouched. One nurse, just a girl, no more than 20, looked at me and whispered, "You were never meant to wake up." I nodded. Then opened my chest. She didn't scream. She just smiled as my ribs folded open and welcomed her inside. Her skin peeled away as she climbed in. A new nurse for the new order. I saw my life replay. Every birthday, every case I ever investigated, every cigarette I'd smoked in the rain outside a station, flickering like film, frayed at the edges. But the people were wrong. My mother had Elena's eyes. My partner's voice came from the mouth of a long-dead orderly. The apartment I remembered so clearly was a padded cell, just painted over in my mind. Every familiar face wore a different name. Every place I'd been now smelled like antiseptic and blood. I tried to remember what city I was from. Nothing came. Just the word, patient. I found a filing cabinet twisted into a spine, drawers lined with teeth. It whispered when I opened it. Inside, my own chart. Or at least, a version of it. Name, Elliot Knox, alias, real name, redacted, diagnosis. Adaptive delusional identity formation cause, redacted, containment status, failed. Infection disseminated. Prognosis, terminal memory loop with progressive self-erasure loop. Self-erasure. I turned the page and saw photos of myself watching myself through one-way glass. One frame at a time. Endless mirrors. In the final photo, I was screaming and holding a scalpel to my own throat, and I realized, I wasn't watching. I was being watched. I kept finding room 401 on every floor. Sometimes it was a chapel. Sometimes a closet. Once it was a room filled with nothing but screaming birds. Another time, it held a version of me nailed to the ceiling, repeating my thoughts seconds before I thought them. I wrote on the wall, "Room 401 isn't real." But when I blinked, the wall said, "You wrote this in blood 6 hours ago." My hands were stained red. The blood wasn't mine. I found a door labeled exit. When I opened it, I saw a recording room with a table and 2 chairs. On the table, a tape recorder, already playing. My voice came through it. This is day 14. He still believes he's a detective. God help us, he's starting to remember. We need to increase sedation. I was strapped to a chair. Or maybe I had never left it. Nurses stood in a semicircle around me, faces melted and reversed, eyes on their necks, mouths where their ears should be. One leaned in close and said in my mother's voice, "You're getting better, sweetheart. Just relax and stop asking questions." They stuck a needle into my eye. Instead of pain, I saw a childhood I'd never lived. Fields of green, a house I'd never seen before. A dog I cried over when it died, though I never owned one. I wept. I remembered things that felt more real than my own name. And then I remembered that my name was a lie. I had never been a detective. Never had a case. Just a diagnosis, containment subject 0A. I screamed. And the walls clapped. In a therapy room made of old radios, I found a mirror. I looked into it. My reflection was smiling. I wasn't. Then it blinked. I didn't. It opened its mouth and spoke, "You're the disease, not the cure." Then it pulled a gun from its belt and aimed it at me. I flinched. The mirror shattered. No gun. No reflection. Only the word "host" carved into the wall behind it. My hands were shaking. But they weren't my hands anymore. Too long. Wrong fingerprints. Fingernails with patient numbers etched into them. I screamed again. And something inside me laughed. One last hallway. Every inch of it covered in names, carved in blood. Some I recognized. Some were variations of my own. All of them led to one final door, marked only with a plaque, "Truth." I opened it. Inside was nothing. A void. Silence. Then a typewriter clacked. A single piece of paper rolled out. It read, "You were born in room 0. You lived 2,387 lives. You broke 93 times. This is iteration 94. You cannot be allowed to leave." The architects. I stood alone in the room. And behind me, something opened its eyes. Time didn't flow. It splintered. I felt centuries pass in the blink of an eye. Seconds stretched into eons. My vision fractured into shards, each showing a version of me in a different era. Me in a straitjacket in 1922, screaming at a doctor who wasn't there. Me in tattered scrubs in 1975, injecting a screaming child with a glowing syringe. Me in a modern suit in 2025, giving a lecture on ethical treatment as patients writhed behind me. Each shard bled into the next until I couldn't tell which Elliot was real, or if any of them were. The hallway around me bent. Ceilings became floors. Doors led into walls. At one door I saw Elliot Knox scrawled by a manic hand, at the next, Patient 0 etched perfectly in steel. My pulse drummed in my ears like the asylum's heartbeat. I pressed my palms against my ears but heard more worlds whispering through my skull, screams, laughter, lullabies, prayers, all at once. I found a room filled with clocks. Hundreds of them. All stopped at different times, 3:14, 11:59, midnight, 6:27. Their faces were cracked, hands bent, gears exposed and rusted. A single pendulum swung in the center, its rhythm out of sync with every other tick. I touched it. The pendulum froze. Then, it reversed. Time ran backward. I felt memories unspool, a childhood I never had unwound into a pregnancy I never bore. A wife I never married unbirthed into a journal I never wrote. My death a moment ago consumed by my birth tomorrow. I tried to step back, but the room was expanding, swallowing me. Clocks multiplied on the walls, and each one's pendulum swung its own dirge. My reflection appeared on every glass face, sometimes smiling, sometimes weeping, sometimes staring back blankly with no eyes at all. One clock's hands began to whirl so fast that its glass cracked and spilled black ichor onto the floor. The ichor pooled, and from it rose a faceless figure in a straitjacket. It extended a bony finger and said in a chorus of voices, "Time is a lie. Identity is a cage. Break free. Become nothing. I recoiled as the ichor climbed my leg. I tried to scream, but the sound came from all the clocks at once. Deafening. I staggered into another corridor, walls lined with broken mirrors. Each shard showed a different self. One was myself as a child, bloody-faced and naked. One was myself as an old man, withered and eyeless. One was my reflection, but with Elena's stitched mouth, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I reached for a shard. It was ice cold, and my hand went through it, like mist. My fingers brushed a cold breeze on the other side. I pulled and the mirror stretched, revealing a room beyond, a nursery full of doll heads, each with my eyes and my smile, their voices humming lullabies in an impossibly high pitch. A shadow moved behind me in the reflection. I turned, nothing. The mirror whispered, "Who are you when the mirror breaks? Who are you when you see yourself in shards?" My reflection lunged out, dragging me into the glass. I fell through and landed on a floor of glass shards, each one cutting me, each cut revealing a new memory. The first drop, me confessing sins I never committed. The second, me laughing at tragedies I never witnessed. The third, me crying when I shouldn't. Between each memory, I lost a piece of myself. A name. A face. A moment. I couldn't tell where the cuts ended and the memory began. I emerged into a corridor lit by flickering bulbs that pulsed like broken hearts. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, once a cheerful pattern, now smeared with frantic tally marks counting up past 10,000. At the end stood a door with no handle, just a blot of black that pulsed. Above it, letters bled one by one, H-O-S-T. I approached. The floor cracked underfoot, revealing screaming faces in the void below. Each step echoed with the bleached laughter of the asylum itself. When I reached the door, the blot turned into a face, my face, mouth torn open, whispering, "We are one. We are all. We never left." I pressed my palm to the blot. The world trembled. Walls folded inward. Time collapsed. Inside the door was nothing, no room, no light, no air. Just silence and the steady beat of something alive. I stepped forward. I don't know how long I walked. Seconds. Centuries. In that void, there was no time, only the dripping of my own blood, the pounding of my heart, and the endless whisper, "Elliot. Patient. Host." I felt my mind unravel like string. Memories tangled into knots I couldn't undo. Names slipped away. Faces blurred. Then, something pulled me out. I was back in the real world. The hospital courtyard. Dawn's pale light. The gates of Merrow Hill Asylum closed behind me. My reflection in a shattered window showed a man who looked like me. But in his eyes, I saw her, Elena Voss. And I realized, the collapse didn't end in the asylum. It followed me. The world outside Merrow Hill was a lie. Or maybe the asylum was the truth. Every shadow stretched longer than it should. The wind whispered in voices I knew, Elena's voice, the architect's voices, my own fragmented echoes. Cars passed by but made no sound. People's eyes flickered with static. I tried to speak, but my voice came out as a series of fractured words, snatches of memories, patient names, screams, and confessions jumbled like a broken radio. At the gas station, the attendant smiled too wide. His teeth were stained with something dark and wet. He asked me, "Did you bring the echo back?" I didn't understand. At home, if this place was home, the mirrors refused to show my reflection. Instead, they showed her. Elena. She smiled and mouthed silent words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. "You can't escape me, Elliot. We are entwined." I smashed the glass. Shards flew and bit into my skin. But the blood was hers, thick and black. A knock at the door. No one was there. But when I looked outside, a figure stood under the flickering street lamp, motionless, faceless, wearing the asylum's old nurse uniform. My memories fractured further. One moment I was Elliot Knox, detective. The next, I was patient zero, victim. Then the architect's chosen host. Voices argued inside me, each claiming the truth. I looked in a broken window and saw all versions of myself, blurring, bleeding into each other. I tried to grasp my name, my purpose, my reality, but they slipped like smoke. I screamed and the voices screamed back. The faceless nurse came closer. I felt the asylum's cold embrace return. She whispered, "You belong to us." I realized it was a trap. The asylum wasn't a building anymore, it was a mindscape. A prison without walls. I was trapped inside myself. I ran through endless halls of my own making, the walls whispering secrets I never wanted to hear. At the end, I found a door with my name carved into it, bleeding and alive. I opened it. Inside was silence. Then a voice, my voice, soft and distant. "You have to choose. Forget. Or become." I understood the choice. To forget was to die. To become was to surrender. The door slammed shut behind me. The walls pulsed, dripping with thick, black ichor. Inside the room was a single chair, blood-stained, rusted, but it held me like a throne. I sat, and the air turned to something heavier, denser, pressing on my lungs. I looked down. My hands were gone. Replaced by twitching, pale things, half fingers, half tentacles, slick with blood and sinew. I tried to scream but my mouth was sewn shut with rusted wire. A voice echoed. Not mine, not hers, but something ancient, something that had been waiting. "You are no longer Elliot Knox. You are the marrow of the asylum. The host, the vessel, the plague." The walls melted. Faces pressed through like ghosts, patients long dead, eyes hollow, mouths full of razor teeth. They clawed through my flesh. I felt every bite, every tear, every crack of bone shattering beneath their grip. Blood poured over me, thick and hot. I was devoured and reborn, layer by layer. My skin peeled back like rotten fruit. My organs writhed, reassembling into something inhuman. The pain was endless. I felt my mind splinter again, each shard drowning in a sea of screams. I was all of them, and none of them. A patient's ghost whispered in my ear, "You cannot hold your mind together anymore. Let go. Become marrow." In the abyss, I saw one last thing, a shard of my old self, flickering like a dying star. I reached for it. It was warm. It was fragile. It was the last thread holding me to who I once was. But as I touched it, the asylum's marrow flooded me, pulling me under. The shard cracked. I awoke, or maybe I didn't. The asylum was gone. The world was gone. Only darkness, only silence. And inside me, a voice, "We are endless. We are silence. We are the marrow."